Choose your enemies wisely, Business Planning for the Audacious Few / Patrick Bet David, with Greg Dinkin. To all my past, current, and future enemies. I'm thankful for you all. You have no enemies, you say? Alas! My friend, the boast is poor. He who has mingled in the fray of duty, that the brave endure, must have made foes. If you have none, small is the work that you have done. You've hit no traitor on the hip. You've dashed no cup from perjured lip. You've never turned the wrong to right. You've been a coward in the fight. Charles Mackay, Scottish author. Introduction. The enemies spoke. A wise man gets more use from his enemies than a fool from his friends. Baltasar Gracian, 17th century Spanish philosopher. In December of 2002, I was 24 and broke, living with my dad in his small apartment. The only routine I had in my life was a rotating schedule of LA nightclubs that I went to 6 nights a week. Saddle, Ranch, Garden of Eden, Century Club, Key Club, Palace, and Dublin's. Half the time, I only knew what night of the week it was because of the club I was in. Every week was the same, until I got kicked out of Dublin's for getting into too many fights. Nothing was going well in my life. Things had gotten so bad that I had a discussion with an army recruiter about re-enlisting. In return for wiping out $49,000 of debt, I would have to commit to 6 more years of service. I was days away from saying yes. That year on Christmas Eve, with nothing else to do, I drove my dad to a relative's house for what should have been a fun break from my miserable life. When we arrived, the celebration was in full swing. Everyone was joking and laughing, and my dad started talking to some relatives in Assyrian. As I chatted with the other guests, I heard a guy who my dad had helped out years before make a sarcastic comment. He seemed amused at seeing how far my dad had fallen since he left Iran. I remember hearing something like Gabriel Bet David, the brilliant chemist in Iran, now the 99-cent store cashier in America, twice divorced and still alone. The group of men around my dad had a good laugh. It was all true. My dad had been a brilliant chemist and now worked at a 99-cent store, where he was frequently robbed at gunpoint. Plus, he really had gotten divorced twice from the same woman, my mom. Even though this guy didn't have any ill intentions, I could see on my dad's face that it hurt. He looked smaller to me. Something about that man laughing at my dad, and maybe more important, the look of shame on my dad's face, produced a fury in me that I had never felt before. I was intense back then, but this brought out another level of rage. Instead of taking a swing at the guy, I walked right up to the circle of men and said, "Nobody talks to my dad like that. For all the things he's done for you, you're not going to talk to him that way. This is not going to happen. We're out of here." I turned to my dad, and repeated, "We're out of here." He didn't move. Maybe it was the pride of not wanting to show his hurt, but he dug in. The room got silent. I'm 9 inches taller than my dad, but he was still my dad. And I would never disrespect him. Somehow, I managed to control myself. And as calmly as I could, I said, "Dad, I'm your ride. We're leaving." The men were staring at us, father and son locked in a silent battle. It was a tense moment. If the wrong thing had been said, it could have turned ugly. With all eyes in the room glued to us, my dad made a comment about wanting to beat traffic. It allowed him to save face so we could leave the party, but I could tell that he was livid. We walked out, and my dad managed to hold his tongue until we got to the car. He turned to me, eyes blazing, and said, "What is wrong with you? Son. You just embarrassed me in front of my family. This is not how you handle yourself." The guy was just kidding. He didn't mean anything by it. "I don't care whether it's a joke or if he's being serious," I said. "No one talks to you that way." For 30 minutes, I couldn't stop repeating to my dad, "They may have to kill me, but the world is going to know your last name." I couldn't even tell you who they referred to, but I was going ballistic. For 30 minutes, I couldn't stop repeating, "They may have to kill me, but the world is going to know your last name." In response, my dad just kept shaking his head, saying, "What is wrong with you, son?" I can't tell you what my dad was thinking at the time, but I could sense that he didn't really believe me. I had yet to prove that I could stick with my goals, so I'm sure he thought that I lacked the discipline to back up my words. To him, it must have sounded more like a tantrum than a declaration. That didn't stop me from carrying on. No one talks to my dad like this. Nobody does. And you shouldn't let anybody talk to you like this. No matter how hard a life we've had. We arrived at our rundown complex in Granada Hills and went up to the apartment we shared. I had one final thing to say to my dad: "I'm going to show the world how special a father you have been." Then I called my sister and brother-in-law and told them to come over the next day for a meeting. When they arrived, we all sat down, and I said, "I'm not going to sleep until the world knows our last name, Bet David. It's game over." The holiday party happened more than 6 years before I started my financial services firm and more than a decade before I started making content for Valuetainment, my media company. So what does my dad being insulted have to do with business planning? Everything. As you will soon understand, the most critical element for success in business planning is choosing your enemies wisely. Yes, you heard that right, enemies. In business, you will face challenges, haters, betrayals, bankruptcies, and ideologies that stand in the way of your success. But what if I told you that these so-called enemies could become your greatest source of fuel? What if you could turn shame, guilt, anger, disappointment, and heartbreak into the fire that propels you toward your wildest dreams? You're going to see how to leverage your enemies to light a fuse that ignites your power to transform. We'll dive deep into the mindset of successful entrepreneurs who have turned their greatest challenges into their biggest strengths. You'll learn how to harness the energy of emotions and use them as a catalyst for success. But this is not just a book about mindset. I'll also provide you with practical tools and strategies to help you navigate the challenges of business. You will see how to use the fuel from your enemies to create a business plan that is emotional, logical, and actionable. The night of the party, I had no clue what a gift this condescending relative had given to me. I didn't realize that, to find the key to my success, exactly what I needed was someone to insult my last name and my father. I learned that I do better fighting for others than for myself. All I needed was for someone to piss me off by offending my dad. The man who insulted my dad created a fire that would move me in ways that I didn't know I could be moved. It's no coincidence that this party was right after my dad had another heart attack and stayed at UCLA Medical Center for a month. It intensified my fear of him dying without meeting his future grandkids. I wanted my kids to know him because I had never met his dad, my grandfather. When many bad things happen at once, and we can no longer handle the stress, we have either a breakdown or a breakthrough. By the grace of God, I found a way to channel all this adversity into changing my life. With the goal of showing the world what the Bet David name is all about, I immediately dropped all bad habits. I was done with clubs. With my free time, all I did was read books on investments, sales, and anything that had to do with business. My sister and my friend Robbie recommended How to Win Friends and Influence People and How to Master the Art of Selling. I took notes and read them over and over. My business did not take off the next day, much less the next year. The last thing I want you to think is that my path was easy. Obstacles will appear for you, as they did for me. Right when you start to make progress, you'll lose a big customer, or your top sales rep will get poached. For me, those challenges seemed to show up on days the bill collectors gave me an ultimatum. It made it harder to resist the military recruiter, who was there to solve all my problems by promising to wipe out my debt and provide an easy way out. You're going to face the same type of resistance. It's going to take something extra to fight through the adversity. Just when I thought I had turned a corner, I lost a big sale, and my only asset in life, a black Ford Expedition that my friends called Big Mama, got repoed. It felt like one step forward and 3 steps back, and it almost drained my energy when all my effort wasn't showing up in my bank account. Whenever things got really tough for me, I could always go back to the image of those men making my dad feel small. The desire to prove them wrong was stronger than the urge to quit. That's why I'm going to keep emphasizing the importance of having enemies. 21 years after that holiday party, this book was published. What I want you to know is that sometimes we spend so much time trying to find how to win at life that we miss the entire point. Maybe you need to look for why to win in life. Did somebody humiliate you? Did somebody manipulate you? Is there a teacher or family member who made you feel ashamed? We're all driven in different ways, but the right enemy can drive you in ways an ally never can. When experts say that you shouldn't get emotional in business, I ask what kind of success they've had. They rattle off their degrees and publications and brag about their prestigious universities and privileged upbringing. Most of the time, they don't have any business success to speak of. Maybe nobody offended them in life, or maybe they were taught to keep that emotion bottled up and not bring it into business. No matter the reason, when I see that they don't have enemies to fuel them, I realize that I am the privileged one. Enemies, the missing element of standard business planning. Most people love to hear a rags to riches story. There's another group of people like you, the audacious few, who want the formula to create their own. Words like perseverance and heart are great, but they fail to tell you exactly what to do to fulfill your own dream. You may know my background and how I went from nothing, fled Iran at age 10 during the Iran-Iraq War, divorced parents, on welfare, 1.8 GPA, no college options, to starting my own financial services firm at age 30. In July of 2022, I sold the business to focus on my next 20-year run. Valuetainment, a YouTube channel I started to offer business advice I wish I'd had when I was starting out, became the most popular channel for entrepreneurs. It all happened while I was running another company. This allowed me to later leverage the brand to build a full-scale media, consulting, and production company. In just a few years, Valuetainment has produced the #1 business podcast on Spotify, hosted live conferences, grown to just shy of 100 employees, and mentored entrepreneurs to massively scale their businesses. The question I think you want answered is, how Did I have a secret? Did I reach into my vault and pull out a revolutionary idea that had never been seen before in a boardroom? No and yes. No, because I started with the same old business plan that everyone uses. Yes, because year after year, after reviewing what succeeded and what failed, I kept adapting. I created a radically different approach to a common business practice that made all the difference in the world. I created a one-of-a-kind business plan. In all my research, it was unlike any business plan I had ever seen. It took years of testing and countless revisions to figure out the exact formula. It then took a couple more years to simplify it so anyone could benefit from it. What I'm most proud of is that it's duplicatable. Anyone, and most importantly, you can create this plan. I used logic and thought strategically. That's where most people start. It's also where most people stop. I wasn't interested in going through the motions to create an unexciting business in which money was the only measuring stick. I wanted something magical that would inspire me and my team. I chose my enemies wisely, because they gave me the energy to keep pursuing the plan long after I had more money than I would ever need. Now that I've made it, at least in some people's eyes, slowing down isn't even a thought. Instead, I've graduated to new enemies who create the fuel that keeps me more excited and committed than ever. Using this business plan, my financial services business grew from 66 agents to 40,000 agents in 13 years and a multi-nine-figure exit. Most of the agents don't have college degrees, and dozens are million-dollar-plus earners. There are also the thousands of people in other industries who I've coached on business plans that have scaled companies and achieved unprecedented success. There's a reason I called out the audacious few in the subtitle. This book is for visionaries, dreamers, and psycho-competitors. I can see how some might think my approach is extreme. But in my view, you have to be extreme to be part of the audacious few. If you want to gain every edge possible, if you are honest and receptive to feedback, I'll guide you down a path that leads to extraordinary results. If you are a competitive person who thrives on doubters and haters, you want to know your blind spots so you can get better. You may be one of the few people who, when it comes to your life, legacy, and family, refuse to take shortcuts or play small. What you will gain from this book, where you are now in your career, doesn't matter. Whether you are in the XUT, own a business, work as a solopreneur or sales rep, or are an employee or a student thinking about starting a business, the process is the same. I'll show you how to choose an enemy and leverage that emotion to build the right business plan. I've seen people who were down and out, who had stopped dreaming, find their way back and go on to achieve incredible things. It started with choosing the right enemy. It's the first and most critical element to writing an effective business plan. I wrote this book because it can change the game for entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, people who work for a company and operate with an entrepreneurial mindset, whether you are hoping to become one or already running a big or small business. Since other plans fail, we're going down a much different path. This is not the boring approach that most people teach. If you're looking to cure insomnia, you can go buy any course on how to write a business plan. What you'll learn here is how to become a leader who lifts up your family, friends, and team. This process of writing a business plan is unlike anything you've ever done before. For the longest time, I hated writing business plans. It felt like homework assigned by my least favorite teacher. I didn't have the attention span or the education to get through a technical book on business planning. I needed to figure out how to organize my ideas and create a tactical plan for my business. At the same time, I wanted to connect to my heart and write something that inspired me. I've learned that writing an effective business plan only requires three things. 1. It must be simple enough for you to want to write it. 2. It must have emotion that is fueled by enemies. 3. It must have logical steps that are clear and well organized. Writing a business planning happens at different times, so it doesn't matter when you are reading this book. You may be starting a business, reorganizing your existing business, or setting new goals. Others of you may be about to begin a new sports season or a new academic year. The time horizon doesn't matter. In fact, this approach is also perfect for a fundraising or political campaign. What all these situations have in common is that you are looking forward and feeling hopeful. There's nothing like a clean slate, a fresh start, an undefeated record. There are no wrongs to right, and no fires to put out. This allows you to put all the pieces in place to make your goals a reality. The plan works for people at every level of business. Complete beginners, without college degrees, just starting out in business. CEOs doing $500 million in revenue, who want to scale or plan an exit. Seasoned executives who want to become entrepreneurs and increase their net worth. Veterans, straight out of the military, starting careers in sales or as entrepreneurs. Sales leaders who want to grow revenue and motivate their team. Couples who work in a business together and want financial and family success. Choosing your enemies is the catalyst. If done correctly, it's the rocket fuel that gets you going. Acting on revenge and envy leads some people to choose the wrong enemy. That type of emotion can end up destroying you. The key is to choose your enemies wisely. As you will see, there's a process to it. You must identify the right target and get emotional when you think about why you must defeat this enemy. You'll see many examples to understand why this is so effective, so you can do it yourself. You also need a methodical plan. You may have heard that people must know why before you can tell them how. A more accurate statement is that you and those around you must know both your why and your how. I've taught my team how to direct their energy into choosing the right enemy, and I've trained the trainer to teach business planning to everyone in the company. That's why I know it can be duplicated, and why you can both learn it for yourself and teach it to your team. I believe that all dreams are sacred. For entrepreneurs, there's even more risk and uncertainty. Many of you have walked away from high-paying jobs to risk your reputation and livelihood on a dream. In these moments, full of hope, you begin to author your own destiny. I know that what happens next will determine your next year and shape your legacy. I also know that poor planning is why most dreams die. That can all change now as long as you put in the effort to follow the step-by-step guide for how to build a business plan. As you go through the steps, you will learn how to tap into your emotion and channel it to become relentless. Identify your vision, define who you want to be, and uncover your craziest dreams. Know the specific action steps to take to accomplish your big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGs. Learn best practices to secure investors and raise capital. Improve your relationships, both inside and outside your business. Master how to lead your team so they are as inspired as you are. You'll finish this book and never look at a business plan the same. What you are about to learn I have taught my teams for 15 years. If it only worked for me, you could argue that it's not duplicatable. The fact that it has worked for thousands of other leaders is why I know it will work for you if you put in the effort. Once and for all, you will have a complete guide to walk you through how to make your business and your life succeed. And it all starts with the one step you absolutely cannot miss. You must choose your enemies wisely. Part 1. Integrating Logic and Emotion to Build Your Plan. Chapter 1. The 12 Building Blocks. The general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. The general who loses makes but few calculations beforehand. Sun Tzu. I was working on a massive deal. Millions of dollars were on the line. And I needed to focus. I told my assistant to hold all calls and tackle anyone who tried to walk through my door. In retrospect, I should have hired a bigger assistant. Actually, I don't think even Lawrence Taylor, in his prime, could have stopped this guy. He stormed into my office and screamed, "I'm so sick of my life." He was shaking. "I can't live like this anymore. I've got nowhere to go and nowhere else to turn. I want to win so bad. I'm telling you, right now, that I'm going to be the best agent in this office. Nothing can stop me." His rage turned to sadness, and for 30 minutes the tears didn't stop. Ernie was 19 at the time. He had $400 to his name, a high school degree, and no business skills. Ernie had all the desire in the world, but I wondered if it would be enough for him to compete. Earlier that day, Larry had presented his business plan. He displayed all the polish and professionalism that you would expect from a UCLA graduate who had worked at Northrop Grumman. His words were as crisp as his starched shirt. His parents had taught him well, and if he ever needed help, they were there to provide a safety net. As you might expect, Larry's business plan was impeccable. It was full of Excel spreadsheets and charts and clearly mapped out goals for the year. When I asked him to share with me why his business was so important to him, he looked confused. When I asked Larry about his enemies, he pointed to the plan, which was bound, and said, "All the relevant details are included herein, sir." I seriously thought about checking Larry for a pulse. Ernie's plan was a mess, and that's being generous. There was no structure to it and no numbers or projections. There weren't even any bullet points. When I asked him about his strategy for prospecting, Ernie broke down again. He said he was tired of the poverty and drama that came with being in a family affected by alcoholism. "Ernie," I said, "I understand what you're going through, but you still need a plan. What is it that you actually want to do?" He couldn't find any words. I could see the toll that his family life had taken on him even before I knew much of his story. It took Ernie several minutes to pull himself together enough so that he could speak. Finally, he managed to mutter, "I'll do whatever it takes not to be poor." If Ernie had been in the room for Larry's presentation, I wonder if he would have been so bold in his claim to be number one. But I saw something in him that I recognized in myself. Unlike some other business leaders, I viewed emotion in a positive light. If you were in my shoes at the time, who would you have chosen to work with, Ernie or Larry? You don't know these two people, but you know their type. In fact, they represent thousands of people I've worked with over the years. Just about everyone I've met before they evolved into the audacious few fell into one of two types, logic or emotion. To make them easy to remember, Larry represents logic and Ernie represents emotion. In 2005, when we sat down in my Granada Hills office, they were both dreaming of entrepreneurial success. Based on what you know about these two guys, who would you bet on? To succeed in achieving their goals, whether they are losing weight, starting a business, or moving up the ranks in a company. Your answer to these questions will tell me a lot about you. If you're more in your head, you'll bet on Larry. If you're more in your heart, you'll bet on Ernie. What I've learned over 2 decades is that neither Larry nor Ernie is a smart bet to accomplish his goals. The logical people are right to believe that Ernie won't be able to stay organized long enough to get the job done, much less raise capital. The emotional people are right to wonder what's going to keep Larry motivated. If you think like me, you would be asking, Ernie, if you've identified poverty as your enemy and are so determined to defeat it, why don't you have a plan? Here's where this gets interesting. You might think that Ernie has the advantage because he's got more to play for. He's more motivated because he needs it more. On the surface, you would be right. But what I've uncovered from doing thousands of plans with people is that Larry can find a reason to want it more. We all have a heart. We all have wounds and dreams that make us emotional. Most people in business have been trained not to go there. For some, they have made it a point to avoid emotion in order to stay centered. For others, they have suffered so much heartache that they focus on protecting themselves from getting hurt. You can probably guess what question I ask that creates the most emotion in people. Who are your enemies? If they don't answer right away, I ask who their haters are, who has doubted them or stood in their way, and who they need to prove wrong. Oftentimes I get blank stares. When I dig a little deeper, I'll sit in silence as long as I need to. Never underestimate the power of silence. The answer usually comes. The emotion that had been bottled up spills out. Maybe Larry still has scars from being laughed at in gym class for being the chubby kid who couldn't climb a rope. Maybe his gym teacher haunts his dreams. It could be an old boss, his more successful friend, or a family member that moves him emotionally. Before we can move forward, we must know the enemy. What matters more, experience or drive? Let's continue to compare emotional and logical people. Would you bet on a polished salesman who was trained by Oracle and had plenty of savings? Or a rookie rep with no skills who needed that sale to feed his family? Would you bet on a desperate systems engineer who is in debt to his bookie, or a happy, experienced engineer to finish your new app on a tight deadline? Would you bet on the team that is more experienced and better prepared? Or the team that is possessed? By possessed I mean that it could be that they have a chip on their shoulder, are mourning the loss of a player, or have a deep sense of pride. I hope what you're saying is, enough of the examples of comparing logic to emotion, Pat. Why can't it be both? Not only can it be both, your business plan must be both emotional and logical. That's why I want you to see which side you favor, and where you need to improve. If you're only logical, you have probably struggled to inspire people. With my approach, you will know what you need to change to accomplish that. If you're only emotional, you have struggled to develop systems and stay organized. This is why you'll benefit from the structure of a methodical plan. There's one other thing to keep in mind. As much as I value emotion, there is also a downside. A person willing to do anything to win often will do anything to win, including break laws and limbs. If they work with you, as an employee, contractor, or vendor, they could put your business at risk. This is another reminder that it's the right type of emotion that you're seeking, in others and in yourself, to fuel your plan. Before we continue, it's important to clarify what emotion is not and What it is in the context of business planning. Emotion is not impulsive, irrational, melodramatic, temperamental, or hot-blooded. Emotion is passionate, obsessed, maniacal, relentless, powerful, and purposeful. The words for what emotion is not describe the people who have chosen the wrong enemy. The list of words for what emotion is describe the audacious few who become unstoppable. The missing link in business planning as well as business meetings, presentations, pitches, and recruiting is integrating emotion and logic. Do I sound like a broken record yet? Good. I've learned from decades of leading people and making more mistakes than I'd like to remember that repetition is key. Because it's been so deeply ingrained in most of us to separate emotion and logic, I will continue to emphasize that the plan has to move you. And it has to tell you exactly what levers must get pushed and when. Just about every business plan written by a Larry or an Ernie fails. One or the other is not enough. One of the barriers to using this plan is the belief that there's no place for emotion in business. There's also a belief that there's no place for crying in sports, but the man most famous for crying in football, Coach Dick Vermeil, was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame and is the only head coach to win both the Super Bowl and the Rose Bowl. Michael Jordan, Serena Williams, Conor McGregor, and Tiger Woods are all emotional. They may display that emotion differently, but they are emotional. The same goes for business leaders. Elon Musk is similar to two other business leaders I respect, the late Andy Grove and the late Steve Jobs. Because they embraced emotion in business. They were also master strategists who could channel their emotion into logical steps. Being enthusiastic isn't enough. It's also not enough to create the most brilliant spreadsheets. Being part of the audacious few means that you embrace integrating emotion and logic. 6 ways people treat business plans. 1. Don't do it at all. 2. Treat it as homework, go through the motions. 3. Half-ass it to impress others. 4. Outline a thorough plan that's only logical. 5. Describe an emotional dream without any logical steps. The only way that works. 6. Fueled by an enemy and combining emotion and logic. How I raised $10 million by integrating emotion and logic. When I first started my financial services firm in 2009, I was full of emotion. I would tell anyone who would listen that we would have 500,000 licensed agents by 2029. For some people, it was easy to dismiss a cocky 30-year-old who had never started a business before. Others were inspired by my passion and asked the next logical question. How will you reach 500,000 licensed agents? In other words, I successfully used the emotion from having a big vision to grab their attention. I made them want to know more. This is an important skill. But when it came to the how, I continued with emotion. We're going to have a sick culture. We will have ridiculous grit. We're going to create amazing events. If you love words, you'll notice how many adjectives I used. As they were in this case, adjectives are often a poor substitute for a concrete strategy. Without a logical plan, no serious investor was interested. My story mirrors that of many entrepreneurs. The ability to move people emotionally is a rare quality that allows a select few to start a company and convince others to follow them without any proof. Entrepreneurs, consultants, and accountants tend to be strong where entrepreneurs are weak. They're great with financial projections and tactical plans. That's why business partnerships that check both the emotional and logical boxes are so effective. Steve Jobs / Steve Wozniak, Warren Buffett / Charlie Munger, Mark Zuckerberg / Sheryl Sandberg, and Bill Gates/Paul Allen, and later, Bill Gates/Steve Ballmer, are excellent examples of balanced business partnerships. I didn't have a co-founder, and it wasn't until later that I developed logical skills and recruited logical team members to complement my strengths. When I first started my firm, I was a lone wolf who only possessed some of the building blocks. Fast forward to 2017, when I wanted to raise $10 million for the business. My vision hadn't changed. I would still tell anyone who would listen that we would have 500,000 licensed agents by 2029. But this time, when an investor asked how, I had a very logical answer. A big reason was that I had hired Tom Ellsworth, a logical and experienced strategist who understood the game of raising capital, to be our president. Tom had played a key role in several exits, including Jamdad, which was acquired for $680 million by EA Sports. With Tom by my side, we put together a pitch deck and financial projections. In Chapter 9, you'll see the exact formula. Our pitch to investors included our growth rate over the previous 8 years, projections for future growth based on real data, a specific growth plan with tactical strategies, and metrics that compared us to others in our industry. A passionate presentation and coherent plans and projections were included in the pitch. Both emotion and logic are required to motivate investors. They couldn't write the check for $10 million fast enough. That's the power of integrating emotion and logic. 2 types of stories to tell. Stories that inspire and invite, emotional. Get others excited. Stories that validate your point, logical. Get others focused. Winners in all fields integrate emotion and logic. Once you start working through this plan, you will see how emotion and logic complement each other. I know most of us can access both, even though we've been trained to rely on one or the other. A clue that reminded me that I had the ability to use logic was that as a kid, I spent hours studying baseball box scores. Numbers made sense to me. I just didn't have the experience to bring analytics into my business. After I read the book Moneyball, and later watched the film where Brad Pitt played Billy Bean, all I could talk about was data. I learned to love gathering data and dissecting business analytics. It doesn't mean that I stopped being emotional. I constantly pour my heart out to my team, and I know that when I touch their hearts, then, and only then, can I get into the details of how to execute. If I talk about what to do before I talk about why to do it, I lose people. I've made every mistake possible when creating business plans, but I learned a valuable lesson from each one. You must begin by choosing an enemy and then combine emotion and logic every step of the way. Emotion reminds us why we do it. Logic tells us how to do it. You know how I know you're going to love integrating emotion and logic? Because it resonates with people from all backgrounds regardless of personality, temperament, and education. I've seen the following types of people thrive when they started using all the building blocks. 1. Accountants, COOs, and analytical types, because they finally understand why people fall asleep during their brilliant logical presentations and why no one had the fire to execute strategies that made sense but didn't move people. 2. The women leaders in my financial services company, 55% of the firm versus 17% industry-wide, because after hearing their whole careers that there was no place for emotion in business, they thrived when hearing from their CEO the importance of expressing emotion. 3. The minority leaders in our company, 54% Latino, 24% Black, because they came to view their underdog status and having A chip on their shoulder as an asset. 4 former military members, because they resonate with the emotion of fighting for your country based on pride as well as the logic of having a tactical plan. 5 former athletes, because the best coaches in sports are masters at blending logic and emotion. Pre-game talks that create emotion are legendary for motivating athletes to exceed their potential. Yet they only work when there is a logical game plan that goes with it. Whether it's in sports, war, or business, you can have a team ready to run through walls for you, but they need to know which walls and how to run through them. The team that wins in sports has the best game plan. The military unit that wins in battle has the best tactical plan. The business that builds the most long-term value has the best business plan. Logic is as equally important as emotion. In fact, it's 50% of the foundation of this book and what led me to create the 12 building blocks. These building blocks integrate emotion and logic in a seamless way. Let's take a look at them in the following graphic. When you look at this chart, I want you to focus on 3 things. First, choosing your enemy is the foundation. You must start there in order to fuel yourself to put in the work and sacrifice that's required to succeed. Next, you'll see that there are 6 emotional and 6 logical building blocks that you will integrate throughout the plan. The last thing to notice is that the only way to reach the top and be part of the audacious few is to complete all 12 building blocks. The 12 building blocks are enemy and competition, will and skill, mission and plan, dreams and systems, culture and team, vision and capital. Because emotion and logic are intertwined, each chapter will blend an emotional block and a logical block to create the business plan that will take you to the next level. You will fill out every block, even if it's only a few sentences. Each chapter has action items, thought experiments, and questions to guide you through filling out the blocks and writing your best business plan ever. While you are filling in the building blocks, keep in mind that you are writing your business plan for 3 different audiences. 1. You've got to be lit up by it and clear on your actions. 2. Your team. A strong plan will get your team on the same page to clarify the mission, act with both purpose and urgency, and operate efficiently. 3. Investors. What you share with investors will be very different from what you do for yourself and your team. In Chapter 9, you will see how investors look at your business and what they need to see to write you a big check. Larry and Ernie learned to integrate. Remember the person I met in 2005 who we called Ernie? He struggled at first because he lacked skills and experience. His work ethic was enough to keep him in the game for a few years, but he refused to read books or address his weaknesses. He said he was willing to do anything, but what that really meant was that he would work hard in areas that were in his comfort zone. In truth, he wasn't capable of doing much of anything. He nearly dropped out of the business. Other guy I met in 2005, who we called Larry, came out of the gate strong. He was competent, organized, and met his deadlines. Because of his reliability, he got hired full-time and started moving up the ranks. But just as Ernie was faltering, Larry was plateauing. He had bought a house, got married, and proved he could make it. He was smart enough to be able to coast and get his job done, which is what he did. Before long, he was a card-carrying member of what I call the 459 Club, the underachievers who are so anxious to leave work that they can't even wait for the clock to strike 5 o'clock. Without knowing his enemies or connecting to his emotions. Larry's outlets became fantasy football, darts, and craft beer. Because Ernie had more drive, he didn't arrive at the bar until 7, but he was right there, with Larry shutting it down. They both needed what the other had. Half of the building blocks were not enough to do their jobs, much less accomplish their dreams. Larry was as allergic to what he called touchy-feely stuff as Ernie was to spreadsheets and books. As is the sad case for most of us, they weren't willing to change until adversity struck. Larry's wife threatened to leave him. Ernie's direct boss gave him 60 days to bring his skill set up to industry standards. Finally, faced with the harsh reality of their shortcomings, they were forced to make a decision: give up or find a way to change. I'm humbled that they both came to me for help. When I presented the framework for this business plan to each of them, the one you have in your hands now, they both felt a ray of hope. Their task was defined. All they had to do was fill in 12 blocks. That's not to say that it was easy, but it was definitely simple. In fact, being faced with blank blocks on a piece of paper forced them to confront their weaknesses and identify solutions. Ernie's skill gap was obvious. When he filled in that block with the courses he was going to take and the books he was going to read, he gained momentum. For Larry, who had never really considered his vision or his enemies, he had to dig deeper to understand what really drove him and what he wanted life to look like for his family over the next 2 decades. He went from being directionless to having a clear mission. You are likely at a place in your career where you know what has already created success and what's holding you back from more. The challenge is knowing how to leverage your superpowers while addressing your shortcomings. If it gives you peace of mind, I've sat down with thousands of people who were in a similar place. Once they saw how simple, actionable, and effective this plan is, they naturally integrated emotion and logic and achieved incredible results. I can point to thousands of regular people who soared by using this approach. After reading this chapter, I hope you have the same level of urgency as I did after leaving that Christmas party. You're so inspired that you want to take over the world. That's what emotion is supposed to do, get you to act. It's also why you need logic to step in. Just as you wouldn't get married when you were drunk, on alcohol or infatuation, you wouldn't invest your life savings without the proper due diligence. That's why before we move forward with the first building block, choosing the right enemy, we must first look back. Chapter 2. Look back to create duration, depth, and magic. The farther back you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see. Winston Churchill. I can't tell you how many times I've recommended the book The 5 Love Languages. I even made a video called The 9 Love Languages of Entrepreneurs because it's so important to understand what makes people tick. I also know that everyone is different. It's the rare individual who takes the time to understand the different love languages, or, in business terms, behavior/buyer styles, of everyone they meet. The person who recommended the 5 love languages to me conducted an interesting survey. He asked every divorced person he knew what their ex's love language was. Almost none of them had a clue. Imagine being married to someone and not knowing what makes them feel loved and appreciated. Is it any wonder they got divorced? What all these failed marriages have in common is that they failed to plan. Some mistakes seem so obvious. When we watch Dr. Phil question someone who made an illogical choice, we find ourselves asking the same question as the TV host: What were you thinking? Logic was nowhere to be found. These people were acting solely on emotion. They were unbalanced. They had never considered any of the logical building blocks. There are so many case studies of failed businesses that anyone with the slightest amount of logic would have known were dead on arrival. But most people whose businesses failed missed one crucial step that could have changed their fate. They only looked forward. Before you write a business plan, you must first look back. Before writing any plan, this is a can't-miss step. Let's think about the process of going through a breakup. After it happens, some of us can't wait to just go to a bar, or swipe right, and meet someone new. We say we're moving on. Then that one doesn't work, and then the next one. And the next one. 4 years go by, and we say, wait a minute. How come I don't have a steady relationship? How come none of these things are working out? I see the same pattern for far too many entrepreneurs. Whether it's dating or business, there's a simple explanation. An important question was not asked, what should I have done differently? You either avoided seeing your role in the problem or you rationalized your role. You didn't bother looking at trends or searching for your own weaknesses. In short, you failed to see yourself as the common denominator. Some people believe that it's best to look forward and forget about the past. They argue that there's something to be said for setting the scoreboard back to zero. If you've sold your house and are moving into a new one, there's no reason to worry about how you let the garage get so messy or the closets so cluttered. Or is there? First off, unless this is your very first business venture, there is never really a clean slate. The residue is always you. Your habits are what created the messy garage and cluttered closets. You'd better take the time to understand why it happened. Is there a trend that you keep picking up on? That you know, deep down, is not effective and is not working for you? I'm emphasizing this point because I missed it for so many years. It took a lot of failure for me to understand that the most important data for you is found in the year that just passed. In order to predict the future, you have to study history. What happened last year for you? What went right? Judge your year based on what percentage of your goals became a reality. If you hit 100% of your goals, that might be an indication that your goals weren't challenging enough. Instead of setting goals that forced you to stretch, you chose ones that were easy to attain. It's often a sign of not picking the right enemy. Once you identify who you need to beat, you will naturally raise the standard for what you must achieve. If you achieved less than 60% of your goals, it tells me one of two things. 1, you didn't give the best effort, or 2, you didn't have the best strategy in place. So it's effort or strategy. In my experience, most of the time it's number 1, effort. In these cases, emotion is lacking because the right enemy wasn't chosen. A lot of people love to give excuses. They'll say that no one understands what's unique about their business and their hardships. They'll complain about the market. They'll complain about anything. Many people make the same mistake when it comes to business plans. They are so anxious to forget about the previous year and wash it away. They comfort themselves with the idea of a clean slate and a fresh start. You may be excited about a new relationship, but unless you examine what went wrong with the previous 3 relationships, the trends, your blind spots, etc., you're going to keep making the same mistakes. If you want to skip this part, if you want to do everything you can to forget about last year, that means you need it the most. When there's one Person insisting that there's no reason to do an autopsy on his rich grandmother. That's the guy I suspect of foul play. Every now and then, when a football team plays a terrible game, the coach will throw out the film and forget about it. But most of the time, especially if you have a coach like Bill Belichick or Nick Saban, they're going to go through every play in excruciating detail. If a software launch goes badly, the project manager will do a post-mortem on every step of the process. The same goes for a heart surgeon. Looking back to learn from mistakes is a linchpin of military training. Every operation requires a debriefing. Information about what went right and what went wrong must get disseminated in order for best practices to become part of new operating procedures. A business is no different. How are you going to fix problems if you haven't deconstructed the process and figured out where things went wrong? There's an entire book called Debrief to Win, written by Robert Q. Joe Teschner, a former Air Force Top Gun, to show businesses how to study the past. According to Teschner, the key to an organization's long-term success is its practice of accountability and the degree to which its leaders hold themselves and their teams accountable for the decisions they make. Do you practice this type of accountability? Do you have the courage and patience to sit down with your team and discuss the specific details about what went wrong? I can tell you that if you're building a business, you're going to make plenty of bad decisions. You are definitely going to make a lot of bad hires. If not, you'll be a business of one. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. New mistakes are okay. Old mistakes are not. When you make a bad hire, don't just have your HR person go through the motions with an exit interview. You need to sit down with everyone who was part of the process and ask these questions. What did we miss? Did we make reference calls? Did we question gaps in the resume? Did we consider both logic and emotion? Did we onboard correctly and set the right expectations? With everything you do, get in the habit of looking back. Start with last year's business plan. You get a pass if you haven't done a plan before. If you're looking at a previous business plan, go back through it with a highlighter and see what goals you hit and what you missed. Make notes on what you failed to anticipate and why. If you didn't do a plan, take the time to think about the last year and answer these questions. Did you have New Year's resolutions or a personal plan for last year? Did you hit your goals? What did you learn from what you did or did not do? Did you have a clear focus? Did you include business and personal goals? Were there clear metrics on how to measure success? For a more detailed way to look back at the previous year, go to Appendix A. Cut the fat by eliminating distractions. Benjamin Franklin said, "I have always thought that one man of tolerable abilities may work great changes, and accomplish great affairs among mankind, if he first forms a good plan, and, cutting off all amusements or other employments that would divert his attention, make the execution of that same plan his sole study and business." In other words, if you want to do something big, you must eliminate distractions. Take the time now to think about what events have consumed your mind over the past year. What are your time and energy leaks? Adversity is part of business. You deal with it. If you obsess over it, you take yourself out of the game. Take a look at this list and ask yourself if anything resonates with you. One bad Yelp or Google review. An event that should have taken 3 days to handle took 3 weeks. Toxic relationships. Unreliable vendors. Vengeful former employees. Did any events consume you for months at the expense of your business? Did your ego take over and seek revenge so much that you lost focus? Don't think I haven't been there. I've seen firsthand how wasted activities and, even more so, wasted thoughts have huge opportunity costs. I'm not talking about the things you couldn't control or are just part of the business, like moving offices, supply chain issues, or difficult employees. I'm talking about what you can control, such as the time you spend on social media, spectator sports, gossiping, afternoon coffee runs, and watching TV. Marcus Aurelius said, "Let no one rob me of a single day who isn't going to make a full return on the loss." Since time is money, lost time is lost money. It's why you have to ask, what will my life look like if I eliminated most of my distractions? Make a list of 5 to 10 events that consumed your mind in the past year. Now think ahead to the coming year. What could weigh you down? What can you clear? How will you clear it? As you look back at your previous year, get really honest about what stole your time and energy. This may be a little uncomfortable for some of you. Giving up drinking, porn, gambling, or even Instagram, ice cream, and internet dating might make all the difference in the world. Yes, the time and the energy make a notable difference, but what's really happening is you are giving your mind a signal that you are serious. When I was 26, I made a promise to myself to give up sex until I made my first $1 million. I ended up going 17 months without sex, and my results, both financially and spiritually, were better than at any point in my life up until then. My drinking days started in the army and are now nearly 2 decades behind me. It seems so obvious to me now to avoid alcohol, yet I get asked about it all the time. My answer: why would I drink? If I drink, I give away too much information. I'm not focused. I don't retain information. I don't learn. I do stupid things. I want to minimize the amount of stupid things I do. I want every edge I can get to make the best decisions at all times. Once I realized all this, it was a no-brainer for me to eliminate alcohol. Rodolfo Vargas, a sales executive at my financial services agency, PHP, and an immigrant from El Salvador, went from being flat broke working as a security guard at Sears to earning a 7-figure income in 7 years. He said, "You need to eliminate. You can't get something for nothing." Over the years, I've given up soda, ice cream, alcohol, and sleeping in. I didn't have a TV for many years. Before I had kids, I gave up my Sundays. Rodolfo told me that he can predict how well his direct reports are going to do based on what they agree to eliminate. It doesn't necessarily need to be that dramatic, but I will tell you this: you'd better be able to follow through on your promise. The minute you break your word to yourself, you have sabotaged your entire year. Before moving forward, you must answer this question: what must I eliminate from the previous year? Magic, going beyond duration and depth. We know that combining logic and emotion is crucial for a business plan. To better understand what I mean, let's use marriage as a metaphor. I've asked many people what defines a successful marriage. The most common answer is staying married. That's when I ask 2 follow-up questions. If a couple stayed together for 50 years and were miserable, would that be considered a success? How about a 3-year marriage that produced 2 amazing children and led to supportive co-parenting? Those questions make most people realize that they want more than to just stay married, in the same way that they want to do more than just stay in business, barely afloat. As in business, you need both emotion, heart, and logic, head, To forge a successful partnership. If I were looking for two words to define success in both marriage and business, they would be duration and depth. Duration, or simply staying in business, shows that you're consistently doing enough good things to stick around and ride out the tough times. Depth is more nuanced. It could mean that you are passionate about what you're doing, making a difference, deepening your pockets, or all three. Most people want both duration and depth. The key to creating both depth and duration is proper planning. In marriage, most people make the mistake of over-planning the wedding and under-planning the marriage. People stress about the invitations, flowers, and food but don't take the time to talk about values, finances, and family. Before I got married, I read the book 101 Questions to Ask Before You Get Engaged by H. Norman Wright. I went through all 101 questions and got very clear on what I wanted. I had my girlfriend at the time, Jennifer, read it as well. It forced us to ask the questions that would determine if we could create both depth and duration. 14 years later, we have 4 kids and are continuing to build depth. When some people hear this story, they accuse me of being a robot. The romantics argue that you don't need to read a book to determine your feelings. Love isn't like business. When you know, you know. I agree that love isn't like business. But we're not talking about love. We are talking about entering into a legal partnership to serve a specific purpose. To make a plan for that partnership to work, it requires 2 things. You guessed it, emotion and logic. There's also something else, and it's hard to describe, but something you can feel in your bones. Magic. I know the word magic drives logical people crazy. They try to define it using words like supernatural or mystical. But these words will never hit the mark because anything magical cannot be put into words. It's a feeling that you are in the right place at the right time, doing something meaningful and being part of a unified team that is far greater than the sum of its parts. It's the butterflies, the chills, the hair standing up on your arm. Calling it the aha moment won't do it justice. There's something magical about seeing it click for someone, knowing that they've discovered an idea that will change the course of their life. It's being part of a team that proved everyone wrong and found another gear to do what seemed impossible. These magical moments are what makes building a business transcend offering goods or services in return for payment. The actual day-to-day of running a business is a series of tasks. Without magic, these tasks become a chore. With magic, tasks have meaning. I'm running out of words, but what I can tell you is that without magic, both a marriage and a business will fail. With magic, you still need emotional and logical building blocks to succeed. That's why I caution everyone before getting married or starting a business and remind them that the odds are stacked against them. I'm not encouraging people to avoid marriage or entrepreneurship. In fact, I constantly remind people that not making any commitments and choosing a safe route in life is riskier. The key point is to choose your commitments wisely. Both marriage and business are treacherous endeavors full of heartbreak, disappointment, and bankruptcy. What makes them even harder is that most people don't do enough planning to understand the risks before getting married or starting a business. With all the evidence about why marriages and businesses fail, why is it so common to jump into these shark-infested waters, often without much thought? One reason is that success looks so damn good. To see a couple in love or a business with momentum is exciting. We crave that type of success. Or maybe we just crave the spoils of success. We become focused on the final product. What we don't see is the work that was required to get there. Another reason is that we are trying to fit in. Marriage is a social norm. And most people are followers. Why get married? Because that's just what people do. But is that a good reason? Is that a good reason for starting a business? When it comes to starting a business, I go out of my way to talk about the panic attacks, the stress, and the lack of work-life balance. I also point out many examples of how you can live a great life being an employee or an entrepreneur. Reasons not to get married and plan a wedding. 1. All your friends are getting married. 2. You enjoy being the center of attention. 3. You fear being alone. 4. You want to have a fun reception and get lots of presents. Reasons not to start a business. 1. You are enticed by the glory of entrepreneurship. 2. You want to get rich quick. 3. You enjoy the thrill of the hunt for investors but not the actual running of a business. 4. You're sick of your current job and want to dip your toe in the water. Need to see some statistics? According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 44.6% of marriages end in divorce. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 50% of businesses fail within 5 years and 70% fail within 10 years. Overspending on a wedding can sink a marriage. Overspending on a launch can sink a business. Many people are doomed before they start. Why? Because they failed to start by looking back. They didn't study history. They insisted they would beat the statistics, but they didn't do the work required to beat them. All I can do is continue to beat this drum. It's up to you to have the willingness to study your past. If you're still not convinced that getting married requires a similar logical process to starting a business, let's look at them side by side. Thoughtful decisions before marriage. Expansion, kids, extended family. Values and principles. Goals and dreams. Continuing the legacy/grandchildren. Documents and legal agreements. Prenuptial agreement, foresees problems. Financial plan. Estate plan. Thoughtful decisions before business. Expansion, markets, regions, offices. Values and principles. Mission and vision. Continuing the legacy/transition. Documents and legal agreements. Partnership and operating agreements, foresees problems. Compensation plan. Succession plan. Just as we overplan the wedding and underplan the marriage, we make the same mistake in business. We overplan pitches and proposals in the business, and underplan the business in perpetuity on the business. In marriage, there is usually too much emotion and not enough logic. In business, there is usually too much logic and not enough emotion. Without logic and planning, both a marriage and a business will fail. And for you hopeless romantics who lead with your hearts, I agree with you. That logic is not enough. As I said earlier, without magic, both a marriage and a business will fail. If you don't have that spark, those butterflies, the excitement that consumes you, then you're not going to succeed. I believe 100% that magic is a requirement. I'm also saying that you need more to move to the formal stage of marriage or starting a business. Winging it won't do. Every business owner falls into one of three categories. 1. Wingers. 2. Thinkers. 3. Doers. The majority of people wing business plans. That first category is really crowded. Most people write one because they have to and end up throwing something together. Which one are you? Be honest and be specific. You may be a big thinker and doer for sales campaigns but wing it when it comes to systems. You may be great planning for momentum but lousy at preparing for a crisis. Give some thought about what you are winging, and how you plan to fix it. And since we keep talking about the importance of studying history, let's examine the country that wrote the book on long-lasting businesses. Plan like Japan, execute like America. Jeffrey Liker's book The Toyota Way was published in 2004 and has sold more than 1 million copies. It's been translated into 26 languages and has had a massive impact on businesses around the world. When I started my own financial services company in 2009, I was only 30, and in many aspects of business I was in way over my head. I wasn't qualified to be a CEO. What I had was emotion and the will to succeed. At the urging of a mentor, I read The Toyota Way, which stressed the importance of casting a long-term vision. From day one, I said that our company would have US presidents, A-list actors and comedians, and Hall of Fame athletes speak at our conventions. I boldly announced that our 20-year plan was to have 500,000 licensed agents by 2029. Since we started with only 66, that sounded ridiculous. There were plenty of short-term thinkers advising me to make the goal to double the number in a year, or maybe aim for 500 agents by the end of year 3. Clearly, these people had not read The Toyota Way. In America, 100 years is considered an old business. In Japan, there are more than 50,000 businesses over 100 years old. The oldest company in the world, Kongo Gumi, was in business in Japan for 1,429 years. When asked how they did it, the last CEO said, "Don't drink too much." In other words, stay stoical, don't celebrate too much or get drunk on social status. Avoid distractions. Keep your eye on the ball. Play the long game. In a Wall Street, obsessed world that emphasizes hitting quarterly numbers, we have to emphasize long-term thinking. We must stop obsessing about the press release, the photographer, and the social media posts for the grand opening and start obsessing about succession planning, leadership development, and value creation. Fail to think long-term and create a business plan that looks far enough into the future, and your success will be short-lived. The downside to the Japanese way can be a lack of urgency and a lack of flexibility. That's where American companies excel. Your job is to take the positives of both cultures so your business can thrive long-term and adapt to a rapidly changing market. By balancing all 12 building blocks, I believe I have found the sweet spot. Your job is to do the same. Let's also take a cue from The Toyota Way and remember that the bigger picture is to have at least a 20-year time horizon. To get there, you must use the 6 building blocks of emotion and the 6 building blocks of logic. Remember that, as excited as we are to move forward with our plan, the first step is to look back. George Santayana, the Spanish-American philosopher, warned us, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. If you want to change the future, you have to do more than just remember the past. You must also be willing to own your mistakes and develop new strategies to prevent them from happening again. Chapter 3. The Path of the Audacious Few. The greatest pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do. Walter Bagehot, English journalist and businessman. Now that we have covered integrating emotion and logic, the 12 building blocks, and how to look back to create depth, duration, and magic, let's put it all together. I want you to see what the entire process looks like for the audacious few who master their business plan. Though this approach to business planning will become an annual activity, it doesn't matter when you start. You can pick up this book any time of year and put it to use. If you're a student, you may start in September. Just as the fiscal year is often different than the calendar year. For a business, yours can be the same. Whether your first quarter ends in March or November, your first step is always to look back at the previous year. Map of PBD's entire business planning process. Step 1. Look back at the previous year. We've covered this, though I want to add how important it is to look not just at your business but also at your personal life. Some of you have generational curses you are trying to deal with. According to Clarence L. Haynes Jr., a Bible teacher and author, the generational curse is a passing down of sinful behavior that gets replicated in the next generation. Curses can be behaviors like drugs, gambling, and alcohol addiction. They can also be intangibles like abuse, a scarcity mindset, and a victimhood mentality. The Urban Dictionary uses this example. Sean just can't stop having kids. 28 years old and already he has 4 kids with 3 different women. This generational curse is going to leave him just like his dad, living paycheck to paycheck, making just enough to get by, trying to feed a small army of his offspring. I thought twice about even mentioning the term generational curse. The only reason I find it useful is to identify a family pattern to figure out how to prevent it from continuing. What I've seen far too often is people using this term to justify their excuses. It has become a catchphrase for victims who lean on their past as the reason they don't win. Yes, on one hand, every family has generational curses, but eventually somebody has to change them. The only time I ever want to hear this phrase is when it's being used in the past tense to talk about change and progress. When you look back at your previous year, search carefully for where you got in the way. Take the time to see your patterns and keep a close eye out for self-sabotage. If you see how this has been a pattern in your family, that's even more of a reason to fix it. Some of you may be looking back at a year that was a personal best. Even if you are killing it in the eyes of others, you may live with the pain in your gut that you have fallen short of your potential. Whichever camp you're in, you have to evaluate the previous year to see where you could improve. According to Forbes, 92% of people don't achieve their New Year's resolutions. Most businesses fail, which means most people fail. They feel ashamed for letting themselves down and disappointing the people who were relying on them. This is why you must take personal inventory. Be honest about where you fell short in the previous year and why you couldn't keep your promises. Step 2. Choose your enemy. Once you have examined the previous year, your next step is to choose your enemy. Studying the past year will give you clues. If, for example, there was a lack of urgency or effort, you can bet the enemy was either non-existent or not challenging enough to create emotion. We're going to look more closely at Tom Brady in the next chapter. When he signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020, he had to choose new enemies. What got him to where he was winning 6 Super Bowls with the New England Patriots wasn't going to be enough to win his 7th. Once he became clear about his enemies, he had the drive to address the other building blocks. For example, he had to refine his training regimen to prevent injury and maintain his arm strength. He also needed to improve his supporting cast, which meant recruiting Gronk and other stars to join him. And on and on and on until he completed all the building blocks. Choosing the right enemy is the first and most important step. Once you identify who you need to beat, you will have the fuel to get to work on the rest of the plan. When you want to beat someone or something bad enough, all the building blocks become important to you. It's not like one day you wake up and, for no good reason, you start to love spreadsheets or exit interviews. What actually happens is that you get so tired of losing, so sick of feeling ashamed, and so determined to beat your enemy that what you once saw as annoying tasks you start to see as tools for winning. When you pick up a book fueled by the desire to defeat your enemy, the reading experience changes. You stop viewing it as a chore and start to see it as an opportunity. The same thing happens for your life. Your wounds and insecurities may be your greatest assets. When I study the people at the top, I usually find out that they were bullied at some point in their lives. This creates a lasting memory and a permanent chip on their shoulder, and whether they know it consciously or not, this chip is why they've found their success. Whether it's an older sibling, cousin, friend, parent, or coach, somebody bullied them and sparked a crippling insecurity. No matter how much that person accomplishes, the insecurity never seems to go away. Tom Brady said, "It's never come easy for me. I don't think my mind allows me to rest ever. I have, I think, a chip on my shoulder, and some deep scars that I don't think were healed." Brady's quote reminds me of Chris Williamson, a British club promoter and host of the Modern Wisdom podcast. On episode 237 of the Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, Williamson said, "I'd been chronologically unpopular throughout all of school, badly bullied, didn't have a group of friends. There was an ambient sense that something is broken with me." Williamson understands how his upbringing drove him. He said, "I think anybody that believes that they're driven by a pure love and positive reinforcement is usually confused." There was a study done that looked at the three most common traits of highly successful people, hyper-successful people. We're talking top-level CEOs. The first one was a crippling sense of insufficiency. The second one was a superiority complex. And the third one was the ability to have a maniacal focus. Students of Jungian psychology may see the similarities between Williamson's viewpoint and Carl Jung's theories about the shadow and how our subconscious drives us. I agree with Williamson, and I would add that the second and third traits are a result of the first. It's the insufficiency that drives the desire to be superior, which leads to maniacal focus. In other words, it's how we respond to our insecurities and demons that shape who we are. I've also seen many people deal with their insecurity by turning into victims. I've watched others channel their emotion into aggression, which leads them to choose the wrong enemies. That could mean bullying others or acting in self-destructive ways. If you want a few million examples, you can log on to Twitter anytime. Then there are the people who have chosen their enemies wisely. You may have heard the story about the two brothers raised by an alcoholic father. One became an alcoholic, and the other never once had a drink. When asked why they turned out the way they did, both had the same response: "I watched my father." Which person in this story do you want to be? We all have our insecurities. It's people like Tom Brady, Chris Williamson, and the sober brother who figured out how to channel the emotion from their childhood wounds in ways that make them better. If you're sitting there, unemotional, claiming that not much stirs you up, buckle your seat belt. We are going to go there. For the logical folks who resist this the most, you're going to have the biggest breakthroughs. And for the people who are full of rage, who have veins popping out of their foreheads, who are willing to run through a wall, you're going to learn Strategies to climb over that wall instead of trying to barrel through it. You may think trying to power through life proves that you're brave, but it only proves that you failed to plan. Step 3. Consider duration, depth, and magic. The sequence to putting your plan together is critical. After you choose your enemy, you can let go of your pen or your keyboard. All you need to do is consider duration, depth, and magic. Visualize what it will look and feel like to create something that continues to excite you and will endure in the marketplace. Take the time to think at least 20 years out so that your actions align with long-term success. Since our instincts are to think short-term, this exercise forces you to extend your time horizon. Slow down long enough to consider how you will plan a business that will outlive you. Long-term thinkers place value over profit. The best way to think long-term is to weigh short-term profit against long-term value. Consider 2 companies with 10 leaders each making $200,000 per year. Company A fires all 10 leaders. Company B keeps all 10 leaders. On top of that, the company invests $50,000 each for leadership development in addition to countless hours of mentoring. At the end of the year, Company A would have $2.5 million less in expenses. If the leadership development was effective, and they are in it for the long game, Company B will crush Company A. When you invest in people, they're going to make the company more valuable. If your competitors are cheap and can't delay gratification and short-term profitability, it puts you in an even better position. For some of you, the thought of creating a multi-generational business will make you think long-term. Taking the time to consider your kids or grandkids running the company will force you to think more about the next 2 decades than the next 2 quarters. Be patient and sit with this for a while. Step 3 doesn't require you to write. It only requires you to imagine what the future will look like. You'll have plenty of time later for details. For now, allow yourself to dream about what it would look and feel like to build a magical company. Step 4, complete the 11 remaining blocks. The next step is to complete the remaining building blocks. Choosing your enemies is the catalyst, so filling out the remaining blocks can only come after that step. You will hear stories, ideas, and suggestions so you can make the blocks your own. The only requirement is to write something in each block. One of the most common questions I get is, am I doing it right? This isn't homework, there is no wrong way. If there are words in the building block, you are doing it right. If you take the time to read the chapter and think about each building block, the way you fill it in is totally up to you. Some people say that the difference between mission and vision isn't exactly clear. Others get hung up on semantics. Many of us fear the red pen of that teacher who couldn't wait to tell us we were wrong. Luckily, it's just you and your business plan. If there's some repetition within your building blocks, that's valuable information, too. If, for example, culture shows up when you think about adding skills and creating your vision, once you get to the culture building block, you'll know this is where to focus your energy. Steps 5 to 8, course correct every quarter. It's not a wish list. I often say that those who don't look at their business plans after February didn't write a business plan, they wrote a wish list. A vital part of the plan is to course correct at least every quarter. You're not writing a plan so it can gather dust for a year. You are creating a document that needs to be continually updated. I don't just mean looking at it or going through the motions by having an off-site review. I mean being as thorough as you were when you wrote the plan. That means starting with, you guessed it, reviewing the previous quarter. You projected doing $3.5 million in revenue in Q1 and you actually did $2.8 million. Now what? How do you explain to your board that you missed revenue projections by 20%? I can tell you from experience that the only thing that will make that meeting less painful is showing that you performed a detailed analysis. When you go to your board with logical explanations, this is how we miscalculated, this is how the market changed, this is how new trends are impacting us, along with revised projections and updated strategies. You've done yourself a favor and put the business back on track. You'll go through the quarterly review process 3 times before the final quarter. When the year is complete, you'll look back at your annual goals, zoom out on the big picture, see which goals you hit and which you missed, and why. From there, you review the previous year and then choose a new and more powerful enemy. The process never ends, which is why you must keep graduating to new enemies. When most people reach a certain level of success, they flatline. Without new enemies to drive them, not only do they get complacent, but they also stop solidifying each building block. When you know what you have to beat, your weaknesses and opportunities stand out, and you'll have no trouble filling out the rest of the blocks. With an enemy that moves you, you will be inspired to keep refining all the building blocks, year after year. The 6 biggest mistakes of business planning. 1. Not having a plan. 2. Not examining last year's plan. 3. Not having an enemy that acts like rocket fuel. 4. Failing to integrate logic and emotion in the current plan. 5. Not making it a living document, don't use it to manage. 6. Not sharing it, so no one could hold you accountable. Putting it all together to go airborne. All the biggest and best companies had an enemy. Microsoft had to defeat IBM. The developers of the iPhone had to kick BlackBerry's ass. Apple's music division continues to compete with Spotify and Mixcloud. The process for you is the same one these great companies used. It's also the formula that Nike used to unseat Converse and Adidas in the basketball shoe market. In 1984, Converse had 56% of the basketball shoe market. With Adidas in second place, Nike was a distant third. In the movie Air, you see how Sonny Vaccaro, played by Matt Damon, found more resolve to sign Michael Jordan after he was insulted by agent David Falk, played by Chris Messina. There's a phenomenal scene in which Fox screams words that I cannot write here, but let's just say that "I'll bury you alive" was the tamest part. It's one thing to be up against competition that is better capitalized than you. It's another to be emasculated by an enemy who is trying to destroy both you and your career. The emotion coming from the desire to make Falk eat his words pushed Vaccaro to find a new gear. The movie showed that Vaccaro had a gambling problem, which hinted at his demons. We don't know all of his insecurities, but his will to succeed was an indication that Vaccaro had a big chip on his shoulder. He channeled the fuel from having Falk as an enemy into his work ethic as well as into emotional speeches to Michael Jordan's family and Nike's CEO in order to sign Jordan to a shoe contract. Enemies were the catalyst. The next step was to consider duration, depth, and magic. Signing Jordan to join Nike was cash negative at first. As with any type of R&D, you must spend a lot of money without any guarantees about what you will earn back. Because the company placed value over profitability, it made the investment of paying Jordan and developing his shoe line. When Nike signed Jordan, Phil Knight said, "It's an art, and you're going to miss a lot of them. When it all comes together just right, it kind of creates magic." See, even the founder of a company that eclipsed a Market cap of more than $250 billion uses that powerful word, magic. Nike also had to address the rest of the building blocks to win the account. For Knight and Vaccaro, that meant committing resources to design and manufacturing and working with the finance team to nail down the deal points and royalty structure. Enemies get the headlines, the rest of the building blocks solidify the deal and keep the business operating. One of your building blocks is your mission, which includes your principles and values. In the film, Phil Knight kept this mission front and center with a blackboard in his office. For Nike, the 10 principles were: 1. Our business is change. 2. We're on offense all the time. 3. Perfect results count, not a perfect process. Break the rules, fight the law. 4. This is as much about battle as about business. 5. Assume nothing. Make sure people keep their promises. Push yourselves, push others. Stretch the possible. 6. Live off the land. 7. Your job isn't done until the job is done. 8. Dangers. A. Bureaucracy. B. Personal ambition. C. Energy takers versus energy givers. D. Knowing our weaknesses. E. Don't get too many things on the platter. 9. It won't be pretty. 10. If we do the right things, we'll make money damn near automatic. Knowing your principles makes decisions easier. There's less temptation to take shortcuts and go for short-term profits over value when you're clear on your principles. That's why I will lead you through the process of coming up with your own values and principles. Once the building blocks were in place, Nike had to look at its quarterly progress and make adjustments. As a public company, Nike had even more pressure to course correct every quarter. Wall Street can be ruthless when a company misses its earnings estimate. When it does, its leaders had better have a good story and the right plan to get back on track. For Nike, they had a lot more good quarters than bad. Not only did Nike defeat Goliath Converse, it acquired the company in 2003, 2 years after Converse filed for bankruptcy. Nike became so dominant that during the 2023 NBA season, more than 75% of players wore either Nike or Air Jordan shoes. You can expect ups and downs in any given quarter. As the end of the year approaches, you must finish strong. You'll get extra incentive from knowing that you will have to look back at the year and evaluate your performance. Next, you will identify new enemies and repeat all the steps. You can follow this map for any endeavor. Most people start a project by listing their goals and objectives. There are 2 problems with this approach. First, you don't have any data to analyze. Even for an entirely new project, you need to at least reflect on your own history and identify your weaknesses. And second, without identifying an enemy, you won't have the emotion that will carry you through all the challenging times. Winning an election, for example, will follow the same script. Start with a personal assessment and look back on your previous wins and losses. Then choose your enemies, which can be personal or ideological. If the enemies create enough emotion for a candidate, if they create a fire so powerful inside him or her that it becomes a battle of good and evil, of life and death, then and only then will a politician have the stamina to execute on all the building blocks, designing systems, building a ground game, scheduling rallies, raising funds, preparing for debates, and assembling a team. Then the candidate must continue to course correct. That might come after polling, debates, or news about other candidates. No matter your industry, you must continue to adapt. A static business plan is a losing business plan. How to use this book effectively. Some people like to read a book from beginning to end first. Others like to make notes as they go. You may want to just keep reading and make mental notes. At the end of each chapter, you'll have a chance to fill in building blocks. In chapter 10 you'll have everything in one place to complete your plan. Once you've finished your building blocks and gone through your quarterly reviews, you will have completed 1 year or season. After that, how long must you continue this process? As long as you want to have a team or business. If you commit to this process, you have a chance to create the business and life you desire. Everything you need to stay hungry and to execute will be in your business plan. It will tap into your heart to keep you motivated, while providing the specific actions. If done with the right emotion and attention to detail, it will be a game changer for you, your business, and your legacy.